With the Yankees on the verge of getting swept in the World Series, it's worth asking the question, were the Mets the best team in New York this year?
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. The World Series might be over as quickly as it all started. It could turn out to be a sweep as the Dodgers have taken a commanding 3-0 lead against the Yankees. And in MLB history, there has never been a team that has battled back from down 3-0. And as good as you might have believed the Yankees were going into this series, this Dodgers team is just the best in baseball. And it's that simple. There's one thing that we have learned throughout this playoffs. This Dodgers team is scary good. And the crazy part about them is they could very well be much better next year. Much better. Shohei Ohtani is going to pitch next year. Who knows who else they bring back in that rotation. If they ever can figure out how to get Tyler Glasnow healthy come October with a healthy Yamamoto, with a healthy Ohtani as their 1, 2, 3. Who knows if they bring back a Jack Flaherty or a Walker Buehler, who all of a sudden looks like the old Walker Buehler, at least a new refined 2.0 version that's really good. Clayton Kershaw could be back in the fold. Who knows? And they're the Dodgers. They might just add more in free agency. Maybe they want Tommy Edman playing center field instead of shortstop, and they sign Willy Adames. There's been reports that they're going to be in on Juan Soto. I'm not buying that one. I don't think Soto would go to the West Coast, but that is a story for another day. In this World Series, the Dodgers have just shown that they're the best team in baseball, and they're going to win the World Series, it seems like, and they deserve it. They went through the Padres, which was a tough series. The Mets gave them, a good run at it. Clearly, the Dodgers were overwhelmed with the Mets got 2 wins, and the Yankees might not get one, which leads us as Mets fans to wonder, if it was a Mets-Yankees World Series, are we really sure the Yankees would have won that? Were the Mets actually the better team this year? They certainly were the better team from June on. And up to this point, they certainly gave the Dodgers a tougher fight because the Mets won a couple of games and the Yankees are very close to being swept out of this thing. And then we all just get to focus on the offseason, which, as someone who no longer has a real dog in this race, that's what I'm rooting for. But let's talk about this series so far, because I think it's proven how good the Mets really were in a lot of ways. Some of the areas where they struggled and said, man, how did you let, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, who hadn't really been that locked in up until we saw him against the Padres game 5 of the NLDS. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, is that the real Yamamoto? You saw him against the Mets. Ooh, that looked really good. And then we saw him in the World Series in game 2. He was lights out. Absolutely lights out. And then Walker Buehler. You can look back at the NLCS and like, man, that was a missed opportunity. The Mets should have got on Walker Buehler, and they had the edge on paper, Luis Severino versus Buehler. That's where they lost the NLCS. Well, Walker Buehler put up 4 scoreless against the Mets, and now 5 scoreless against the Yankees. Gave up 2 hits, 2 walks tonight. Was really never at risk of giving up a run outside of a Giancarlo Stanton double, and then Stanton, just an embarrassing send, gets gunned out at the plate. You look at this series, and ever since Freddie Freeman hit that grand slam in game 1, the Dodgers have been in complete control. Now, if you are a Yankees advocate, you would say, well, the Mets didn't play the Dodgers that closely and it lost the entire series. When the Mets lost, they got blown out. The Yankees have not been blown out yet. I think you can say pretty clearly the Yankees have pitched better against the Dodgers than the Mets did. And I don't think that is some crazy assumption there. You look at what they've done this series outside of that grand slam, haven't given up more than 4 runs. The last 2 wins for the Dodgers have been by an identical score of 4-2. In that game 1, the Yankees got off to the early lead. Giancarlo Stanton with the 2-run homer. The Dodgers had scratched a couple runs throughout the game on sac flies, and that forced it to extras. Yankees scored 1 top of the 10th, and then we all saw what happened in that game 1 where they loaded the bases for Freddie Freeman, and Freddie Freeman hit one of the most iconic home runs in World Series history. But Garrett Cole was still very good in game 1, and you look at what happened overall in the last 2 games. Carlos Rodon was not great. Did give up 3 home runs to give up 4 runs. Clark Schmidt didn't look great either, but the Yankees bullpen has been pretty solid for the most part here, outside of, again, that grand slam given up to Freddie Freeman in game 1. Nestor Cortez throwing a pitch right into Freddie's wheelhouse that he just absolutely destroyed. I think when we look at the Yankees and the Mets this year, the Yankees made it to the World Series, and for that, of course, they get that AL pennant that goes on their long record of AL pennants. And they made it further. But who had the more memorable run? And yeah, it's tough to compare these two teams because the Yankees are battling their own history. The Mets don't have the history to battle against. So a run to the NLCS is so much more rare for the Mets than just getting to the ALCS was for the Yankees. And even getting to the World Series for the Yankees is a lot more routine than the Mets just getting to the NLCS and getting to a game 6 and taking out along the way the teams that the Mets did, from that iconic home run by Pete Alonso against the Brewers to beating your division rival who won the NL East in the Phillies. And even before all of that, to beating the Braves in that pseudo game 163 that was really game 161, where they had that incredible come-from-behind victory with Lindor hitting the home run after the Mets had already rallied back and then blown it, and then Lindor delivered that special moment. This was a season for the New York Mets that will go down in history as one of the most incredible runs this franchise has had to battle back from where they were to where they ended up. It was amazing. And if the Mets faced the Yankees in the World Series, I think they would have given them a damn good fight. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Who would have won that World Series? The Mets have pulled off the miracle among all miracles and somehow beat this Dodgers team in 7 games. Who would have won, Mets versus Yankees? We're going to talk about that in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike on other apps, on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 players to have projections. You watch the winnings roll in. Get on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today, where you can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. So you can turn $10 into $1,000. You can cook up hot takes with your friends and win real money this football season when you and your crew run your game on Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play that first $5 lineup. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. Now, we'll never know what have happened Mets versus Yankees. We'll be able to look at their respective 7-game series against the Dodgers, and if the Yankees get swept, we think we'll be able to say, you know what, the Mets took 2 against the Dodgers. Yankees couldn't pull that off. Maybe they were the best team in New York this year. I will say, to the Yankees' credit, if they can find a way to win a game 4, which will be a bullpen game for the Dodgers, and we know how those things go, right? If the Yankees can jump on the Dodgers bullpen early and they can make it lopsided, the Dodgers will be apt to potentially hold back some of their high leverage arms, go to the Brent Honeywell card, and save them up for game 5 to try to beat Garrett Cole and prevent this series from going back to LA. So that's still a possibility. And then you get to game 5. You have Garrett Cole on the mound. He could deliver an iconic performance. I think they would need more than 6 innings out of him this time. I think they would need 7 or 8 to really just put his foot down and make his imprint felt on that game. And if that all happens, maybe we are talking about the Yankees taking this thing to 6 games. And maybe Aaron Judge figures it out at some point and gets hot. And all of a sudden, the Yankees turn into the best version of themselves. And maybe it is one for history. Maybe they push the Dodgers to a tough fought game 6. Maybe they even extend this thing to a game 7 and put themselves on the precipice of history. Maybe they do the impossible. But on the other side of it, you have a Dodgers team that is absolutely rolling, that stared down elimination against the Padres, was able to win those 2 games, face elimination, went up against the Mets, took an early series lead, lost game 2, ended up taking that commanding 3-1 lead, took a massive punch from the Mets in game 5, and in game 6 just ultimately overwhelmed the Mets in that tough fought series. And after taking out maybe the best team that was not themselves in the playoffs, because I think if we look back at history, maybe the Padres were the second best team in baseball this year. Then they go up against the hottest team in baseball, the Mets. By the time they get to the Yankees, it just feels like they know how to win. And they're going to find their way to score on Luis Gil. And that might just keep them in the game enough where they continue to go with their leverage arms. And maybe they just keep on scoring and this turns into a slugfest. Maybe Gil's amazing. We'll find out. But regardless of where this series ends up, as far as how many games are played, if the Yankees lose to the Dodgers and don't pull off the miraculous comeback that has never happened before in MLB history, I think we can look at these two teams and we could say the Yankees had the better pitching. But I believe the Mets have the second best offense in baseball, or had the second best. Still hurts a little bit. Had the second best offense in baseball this year when we actually watch it play out in the playoffs. You look at the OPS leaders among the teams that played in at least 10 games. So we're looking at those final 4 teams in the LCS round. You have Jesse Winker with the best OPS, 1.167, 1 home run, 2 triples, 4 RBIs, 7 runs scored. Not a ton of sample, but he was great when he was in there. Then you have Stanton, 1.110 OPS, leading all hitters with 6 home runs. He now tied Mark Vientos with 14 RBIs. Mookie Betts has tied him as well at 14. You have Juan Soto, third best, 1.095 OPS, 4 home runs, 9 runs scored, 9 RBIs. You go then to Pete Alonso at a 999 OPS, 4 home runs, 10 runs scored, 10 RBIs. Mark Vientos, 998, 5 home runs, which is second most in the playoffs, 14 RBIs. Mookie Betts, 976, 4 home runs, 14 RBIs, 12 runs scored. Tommy Edman, 896 OPS, 13 RBIs. An NLCS MVP, unfortunately, 2 home runs, 5 doubles, which leads all hitters in the playoffs. And then it's Lindor, 877 OPS, 8 RBIs, 11 runs scored, 2 homers. Rounding out your top 10 would have been David Fry, Stephen Kwan, and Kike Hernandez. And then just beyond that, you got Jose Ramirez, Max Muncy, and Shohei Ohtani. So those have been the top 13 hitters in the playoffs, and the Yankees have 2. They got Stanton, they got Soto. Aaron Judge has been a disaster for the most part in the playoffs. You look at the top 8 hitters, you got 4 Mets. You got Winker, Alonso, Vientos, and Lindor. The Dodgers, when you expand it out to the top 13, well, they got Betts, they got Edman, they got Muncy, they got Ohtani, they got Kike, they got 5 of those guys. I think those are the 2 deepest lineups for sure. But the Mets are right there with the Dodgers offensively. I really believe that. And ultimately, it was a lack of pitching that cost the Mets when it mattered most. The guys just wore down. But if they had pulled off miracle among all miracles and won that series against the Dodgers in 7 games, and then they would have gotten some rest before the World Series, where they could have gone up against the Yankees, probably start Jose Quintana game 1. You give Sean Manaea 6 days rest to really try to get him through the World Series after going through what clearly was a case of just tired arm, too much fatigue at the end where he just didn't quite have it. From the final inning of his Game 2 start to pretty much everything we saw from him in that pivotal Game 6, that deciding Game 6. If the Mets are able to give an eye that extra rest, maybe you get a better version of him in Game 2 of the World Series. Maybe on 5 days rest, if it went to a Game 6, maybe he would have been himself. I think the reason that the Mets might have lost to the Yankees had they gotten to the World Series would have just been sheer exhaustion, and that's what cost them against the Dodgers. But if you really talk about the components of what made up these two teams, their identity, who built a winning culture, a group that believed that nothing was going to stop them. The Mets were the best team in New York this year. And the Yankees might prove me wrong. Maybe the Yankees have that fight in their dying breath and they're able to extend this series. And if they do, hey, they made it to the World Series. If they push the Dodgers back to LA, I will completely go back on this. I'll say, you know what? The Yankees were the better team. They made it to the World Series. They got to a Game 6 just like the Mets did. But I think when you look at the Mets and you look at how they battled adversity, from the Brewers series to even before that against the Braves, to going up against a really tough Phillies team that's been battle tested in October. And then you win Game 2 after getting punched in the mouth in Game 1 of the NLCS. You lose in heartbreaking fashion in Games 3 and 4 where you just get smacked in the mouth yourself. You get up off the mat and you win in resounding fashion in a Game 5. You knock around the Dodgers ace right now, Jack Flaherty. And then in Game 6, even though the Mets lost ultimately in blowout fashion, they still scored 5 runs and they left a lot on the table. They mashed the Dodgers in hits. That lineup fought until the last out. They just didn't have enough pitching. So I believe that this year, the real team in New York was the Mets. Next year, will it be any different? I'm going to talk about that to close the show. First, though, another word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action this season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. That's FanDuel.com, and the FanDuel Sportsbook app will give you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So if you get the hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And if you throw that $5 bet, the first one down on, let's just say, Knicks money line against the Pistons on Friday, and the next win, you're rolling because you get that $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. Like today, there was a minor league signing that we'll talk about a little bit. Chris Davinsky joined the club for 2025. David Stearns, don't take any time off, man. He's already on that horse. Throughout the offseason, there'll be a lot of news items like that, and I will send the insiders that first inside look into what the move was and my take on it. If you want to be an insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, let's say the Mets and Yankees just simply kept their lineups together going to next year. Who would be better? The Yankees with Gleyber Torres, Juan Soto, Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, Jazz Chisholm, Anthony Volpe, Anthony Rizzo, Austin Wells, and Alex Verdugo, or the Mets with Francisco Lindor, Mark Vientos, Brandon Nimmo, Pete Alonso, Jesse Winker, Starling Marte, Jeff McNeil, Francisco Alvarez, and Tyrone Taylor. I think if the playoffs has taught us anything, the Mets had the better offensive lineup this season. The Yankees were carried throughout the regular season on the backs of Judge and Soto. In the playoffs, it's been Soto and Stanton. And other than that, and really once you get past the top 4 of that Yankees lineup right now, it is fallen off a cliff. Jazz Chisholm has not been the difference maker they thought he would be. Would you have imagined the way those trades were reacted to at the time that Jesse Winker would have been head and shoulders better than Jazz Chisholm in October? Probably not. But that's how it played out. Now, these teams aren't going to be the same next year. They're going to make moves. The Yankees have a ton of free agents, just like the Mets do. They got a decision to make at first base with Anthony Rizzo. They got a decision to make at second base with Gleyber Torres, and by extension at third base because they likely move Chisholm to second base next year, and that opens up a spot at third. Then you look at Alex Verdugo. He likely gets replaced in the outfield by Jason Dominguez. On the Mets side of it, you got Winker, Iglesias, Harrison Bader, and JD Martinez. You have to make some decisions on. Could easily replace those guys with some youth combination of Luis and Acuna, potentially a Jet Williams or a Drew Gilbert, Ronnie Mauricio, Brett Beatty. Any of those guys could fill those spots. Then there is the big question marks for each of these teams. That is their premier free agents. Arguably the top two hitters available this winter, Juan Soto, Pete Alonso. Where do those guys land? If those two guys return to their current teams, I'm confident the Mets would have a better lineup because they would enhance their roster a little bit. I think they'd still add an outfielder, whether that was moving Nimmo back to center and getting a bat in the corner like an Anthony Santander or a Teoscar Hernandez. I think they would try to do something there to boost their lineup in the outfield. Maybe it's bringing Winker back as well. You never know. Maybe it's going out and acquiring a center fielder. Not a lot available on the market when it comes to free agency, but maybe they get creative and they find a trade partner out there. Maybe they buy low on Luis Robert. I don't know. I think the Mets would go into next year with the better lineup, even if the Yankees bring back Juan Soto, unless they were aggressive in other areas. But I think if the Yankees sign Juan Soto, that's probably it, right? I could see the Mets signing both Soto and Alonso, or signing Soto and doing some other creative things where they continue to enhance the lineup. Maybe they get a third baseman somewhere. I was going to do a show today about Nolan Arenado. We're saving that for later this week. You might say, man, why would they want him? He's definitely regressing. Contract a little more attractive than you would think, but we'll talk about that for another day. Overall, though, I think the Mets go into next season, and they're going to have a lineup that's going to be right there with the Yankees, with or without signing Juan Soto. The Yankees sign Soto, I still think the Mets will be right there. If the Mets sign Soto, they're going to be head and shoulders better than the Yankees on the offensive side of things. The pitching, the Mets have to catch up. But let's just say they are super aggressive. They get a Corbin Burnes to headline their rotation. All of a sudden, they're cooking with gas. If they get really aggressive, bring back Benai and sign Corbin Burnes, and they're running into next season with a similar lineup, but Corbin Burnes, Kodai Senga, and Sean Manaea top their rotation, that's a team that can win a World Series. So we'll see how the Mets ultimately spend their money this free agency, but they're going to have a lot more money to spend than the New York Yankees. New York Yankees have money coming off the books as well. Don't get me wrong. But they don't have as deep as pockets as the Mets do. Are they going to go past $300 million again? Or are they just going to be committed to signing Juan Soto? And once that's done, you just fill out the roster the best you can. If the Mets got Soto, I think that would push them to spend more. I think it's, hey, if you don't sign Soto, maybe you dip below $300 million. But if you do sign Soto, maybe you're right back to $350. Maybe you're looking at that Dodgers team across the country that just won the World Series. Say, man, we got to compete with that. So we got to just go all in. We'll see how it all works out. It's going to be a thrilling offseason. It could begin as soon as Wednesday. We'll see what happens in this World Series. If you had to ask me, do I want the Yankees to get swept? The Mets part of my brain says yes, absolutely. Leave no shadow of a doubt who the better team in New York was this year. The Mets get 2 games in the Dodgers. The Yankees get none. Argument over in my Mets brain mind. As a baseball fan, I'd like to see the Yankees turn this into some kind of a series, but it just doesn't look like it's going to happen. So we'll see how all that plays out. To give you your little tiny bit of Mets news, first transaction of the offseason happens when the World Series is going on. Whoever signs minor league deals during the World Series, MLB free agency, not even open yet. They could not have signed Chris Stefanski to a major league deal. I honestly didn't even know you could sign minor league deals at this stage because it just doesn't really happen. Like the calendar hasn't technically flipped over to 2025, but you have less restrictions on what you can do on a minor league deal. And so the Mets add a relief pitcher to their stable. Last offseason, we saw David Stearns very aggressive at adding guys on minor league deals. Some of them, panned out for other teams like Michael Tonkin. He was a split contract. Austin Adams, another split contract, but essentially a minor league deal. I'm trying to think of the minor league deals that worked out for the Mets. I guess Danny Young was probably a minor league deal. They had Reed Garrett already. Daniel Nunez was in their system. They didn't hit on a ton of those, to be honest, but they did have a lot of depth by just the amount of arms they brought in. Signing a Jorge Lopez to a major league deal, a low-level one, was a good deal until it wasn't. It was good when they had that first winning streak of the season early on after starting 0-5. And then in May got pretty ugly with Jorge Lopez. But overall, I think my biggest takeaway from this Devanski signing isn't really about the pitcher, although to give you my little quick notes on him, dude with a nasty changeup. This year, batters hit 163 against it, and he had a 6.75 ERA. Threw that pitch a ton. That was his one weapon. When he threw anything else, it was a problem. He does have a fastball that is 10 miles per hour faster than his changeup, so that's really the arsenal, and it worked for him when he got to AAA with the Mariners in July, where he pitched to a 2.35 ERA in 23 innings. But early in the season with the Rays, he just never quite tapped into it. 6.75 ERA again. So you're not looking at this and saying, oh, yeah, this is a huge signing. But to me, it's just the timing of the deal that matters. It shows you that the Mets aren't just laying out and watching the World Series. There's other GMs right now that I'm sure are having some meetings. They're setting their course for the offseason. They're having some internal discussions on their own free agents. They're seeing what's in the market. They're starting to canvas. They're doing their job still. But who's aggressively on the phone with Chris Devanski saying, hey, come here and we're going to, help you next season, be a big part of our bullpen. We believe that we can get more out of you. It's like selling Devanski right now. Sign with us now. David Stearns and the Mets. And I think while it is just a minor deal in every way, it's literally a minor league signing, and it's one that we might not ever see, impact the big league roster whatsoever. Devanski might get knocked around in spring training. He could be in another organization by mid-April. Who knows, right? But I think it does say a little something about the way the Mets are going to pursue this offseason, the way that their front office is tirelessly working to get this team over the top. And as we continue these offseason discussions, like tomorrow, I probably will spend some time on Nolan Arenado. The Cardinals might be looking to move money. And it's sort of an interesting idea if you're looking at 3 years and $52 million left on Arenado's deal, potentially moving Vientos to first base, letting Arenado play great defense next to Lindor. That would be unbelievable to watch. And Arenado, not a great hitter anymore, but still good. So there's that side of it, right? There's that type of a move the Mets can make. There's the free agent transactions. There's so many ways the Mets can improve their roster. They really have all avenues at their disposal. And that's going to make this a fun offseason as we get to go through all these different possibilities and we see which moves the Mets ultimately decide to make. But this is going to be a team that's drastically different next year. I think it's going to be different for the better. I think they're going to build off of what we just saw, and they're going to come back with a 2.0 version under David Stearns that is going to look very, very formidable and a type of team that can go up against anybody in their division, the Braves and the Phillies, and potentially be right there with that team that everyone's going to be looking up at, the Los Angeles Dodgers, who are clearly at the precipice of what could be a very scary dynasty for everybody else in the game. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's show. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on social media on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league by Locked On Sports today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube.